So here is my palette for this painting. I kept it really neutral. The lighting was pretty diffuse in the background, so I didn't want to get too detailed, so I chose mostly shades of gray. And then for the greens and the purples, they're pretty muted, other than a couple of the greens you can see there that I used for some highlights, but I did blend them out quite a bit too, so they're not super bright in the painting. So I started out with doing a rough sketch, and I just kind of tried to sketch in the outline of the main things. And this one I am painting on velour paper from Hahnemühle, I think is how it's pronounced. I'm not completely sure. But I've only used this paper one other time. So it's completely different for me, and it works a lot differently from regular sanded paper. It's really hard to blend these earlier layers. Like on normal sanded paper, you can put a layer down and then blend it into the paper. With this velour paper, you really can't, and you can see all the streaks and lines from the pastels. And I actually cut this couple seconds out, but I had tried to blend all of that first layer with my hand, and it didn't move at all. So while I'm putting the second layer of darks on, I'm thinking in the back of my head, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to blend this? But as I go, you can kind of see it does start to blend itself as I work at it. And I was trying to do some cross hatching and layering and trying to see how easy it was to conceal some of those lines and get things to blend a little better. And the more I worked at it, the more it was blending, and I was starting to kind of get a hang of this paper. So to start with here, I am just putting in the main background areas. So I took this picture outside of my house on my deck, and I was facing the house. So the light off to the left is actually the porch light, and then the darker area behind the spider is my house. And then there's that little bit of greenery was from a bush or a tree off to the side. And I didn't want to have the background in focus. In the picture, it's not, but it is a little more detailed in the picture than what I put into the painting, but I did that on purpose. I was trying to make the spider the main focal point of this painting. So I blocked in the background, just more of the shading versus putting in detail. And now I am bringing in the greens for this tree that's off to the side. And this was pretty challenging. Again, I didn't know how to work on this paper, so I was trying some different things. And I started by putting that dark layer down, and then I put my dark green over it. And then I did a little tiny bit with the lighter green, but it looked pretty dull. So now I'm going in with a really deep green, and this is almost black, but it is still green, and I'm using that to bring some of the shadows into the greenery here. And I liked that green color so much, I kept using it in the darker areas of the painting too. So I didn't switch to a more grayish color. I'm still using that really dark green. And that, I believe, is a Terry Ludwig. It may be a Blue Earth. One of those two. But it's pretty soft. And this velour paper, it does take quite a few layers. And I found that with the really soft pastels, the paper grabs them. So I did start out, those first few layers were my Rembrandts. And if you know the difference between some of the pastels, or Rembrandts are kind of a medium hardness. So I purposely chose those because from my one previous time of using this paper, I used more of the super soft pastels, and I ended up with way more color on the paper than I wanted. So that was definitely something I learned with this paper. So I'm just continuing to work on this greenery and the background. Again, trying to keep it kind of soft focused. I don't want it to take over when I put the spider in there and the web. And I just keep adding a layer of color, and then I blend it a little bit, and then I add some more color and blend it a little. And I'm using a really, really light touch here with the color because I'm not quite sure how many layers this paper is going to take, and I didn't want to fill it up. At this point, I am using a Jack Richardson, and that is kind of like a taupey gray tone. It's like just a real mid-tone kind of blah color to get a little bit of that depth back into the greenery. So now I am trying to pull in some of the highlight that is around the spider, that glow that is picked up around his body from I guess it's a her. I think it's a her. I don't know. We called her Charlotte, very original of us. But she's got little fuzzies all over her body, and she had this really cool halo or glow around her. So I was trying to put a little bit of that in the background, so it wouldn't be as hard to go in and try and define all of that after I had the spider down. So now I am blocking in her body. Here I am using the Terry Ludwig V100. So this is a really, really dark violet, and this is representing the darkest areas of the spider. So I did that first, and now I'm just taking a little, this is a cheap, I think it's the Mungio. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, but it's a brand that you can get on Amazon. This was actually my very first pastel set that I bought was these tiny little Mungios. But they're so small, and they're not too soft and they're not too hard, so they work really well for doing this kind of thicker line work. So I'm just using them to sketch in the legs of the spider. And this is a black, but I'm going to go over it with that dark purple. But I didn't want to try and draw these legs with the V100 because it's so soft, and just the slightest touch and I would end up with a weirdly shaped leg. So I'm just bringing in some more darks into this spider body, going over it. Looks like I'm going over it with a really dark purple here. I don't think I used black on the body. I think I stuck to the purples, but I don't remember 100%. And if you look at the photo of the spider, she has two little like dimples kind of on her back. So that's what I'm trying to bring in here, is just those two little indents that are on her back. And now I'm using a lighter violet color. This is also Terry Ludwig. And her legs are striped. They're like a white or a lighter color, and then they're striped with a darker purple. So I'm starting to kind of bring in some of that purple into her legs in the striping, because I plan on adding the lighter color in a minute, which is what I'm doing right now. And this is also another Terry Ludwig. And I like using the straight edge pastels for this type of line work. I find I have a lot better control than using a round pastel for this type of thing. All right, so still working on those dimples. And I'm trying to highlight them like the photo has kind of that brighter highlight just at the bottom of them. So I realized I needed a lighter shade. So this is a really, really light purple. And I'm also using that to accent the lighter spots or lighter bands on her legs. And I apologize because I bumped my camera and I didn't realize. So now like part of the painting is off to the side. And I didn't realize that, so I apologize. I will definitely take better notice of that in the future. But just continue refining the body here. And you can see I kind of blurred out the really bright underneath the dimples. I blurred that out, but it's still there. I just softened it up a little bit so it didn't, jump out at you. But it gives a nice highlight to the spider's body there. All right, so now I am going in. This is a Rembrandt pastel, and I think it's a really light pink, I believe. And now I am just putting a highlight around the spider's body with this. And I chose this pastel because it's that harder type of pastel, so it's not going to kind of get fuzzy as I'm drawing. I'm able to keep a nice sharp line and keep control of it. I don't have to push very hard because it is soft enough. So I'm just using that to, like I said, get some highlights where I need them around the spider's body. And now I am attempting to blur that a little bit with my little stump here. And in some places it's blurring the way I want it to, and in other places it's not. But it is helping to soften it up, and I'm going to come back in here in a second with a softer pastel and add some of that hair, those little hairs that you see. But I was hoping I could do it with the stump, and I could not because, again, this paper, unless you have a ton of layers on it, doesn't really blend that well. And I definitely didn't have enough layers right there to be blending those out. So now I'm trying putting the pastel onto the stump and bringing it in, but that wasn't working either. So I thought, okay, I got to do this by hand. So now I'm using a really soft, I think this is also Terry Ludwig, and I am literally just very, very gently just touching with the barest amount of pressure. And it's giving me that fuzziness that I wanted around the spider body. But it is, in a couple places, it's a little too much. So you'll see in a minute, I do come in after I get all of this white fuzz where I want it to be, I do come in and soften it up in a few places. I can't decide which way to hold my pastel. This was really hard because of where I have my camera is right where I needed to put my face so I could see where my pastel was touching the paper. So I was kind of doing this blind because I didn't want to bump the camera or get my head in front of the lens, which I've done in a few other videos. So the fact that I was able to do this as accurately as I did and not like completely put the white marks in the wrong place is amazing to me. Kind of nothing short of a miracle. So now I am using the darker gray to soften some of that white. And now here I'm using one of the lighter shades of gray to go in and get some more detail in there, separate out some of the hairs a little bit. So this is almost like putting sky holes in a tree, except it is, I guess, light holes in a spider. Redarkening some of the things that got covered up a little bit with the white. And this is a Rembrandt pastel here that I'm using. I didn't want to use the Mungio again because the lines that the Mungio makes were a little bit too thick for this. So I went to the Rembrandt because I can make thinner lines. I'm just trying to blend a little bit more. And I really wanted to finish the background and get it exactly how I wanted it before I started putting in the web, because once I started with those web lines, I would, it would be very challenging to go back and fix anything in the background. So I'm going back in again with some of that lighter green because I had lost the brightness that was in the background from the leaves, the light shining on those leaves. So I'm adding that brighter green back in. And then just a hint of this, it's almost like a neon yellow green. And then a little bit of that kind of neutral taupe color. And then I'm gonna blend it a little bit more before I start in on the web strands. And that is my new favorite blending tool. It's a little piece of rubber foam, and I found it does not, so far anyways, it has not gotten any kind of wear and tear from the paper. I'm just kind of surprised that it hasn't had anything at all. It still looks brand new. So if you want, I will put a link in the description if anyone's curious, but that works really well. So now these, I'll have to look up. I ordered these pastels from Dakota. I don't remember exactly what brand these are, so I'll have to look it up and then I'll put it in the description. But it's a very hard pastel and it is square, so it has a sharp edge, 4 sharp edges. And I am using that edge to create these lines. And I'm putting the entire pastel down on the paper and then sliding it in just a straight, steady motion. I'm not trying to draw the lines with like the tip or the corner. I'm laying the whole thing flat and then just kind of sliding it to get that straight line. So I'm using this to mark in the longer lines. And then I have some shorter, similar hardness pastels. I have some shorter ones. The Mungio, I don't remember what the other one is. I think I have 2 others that I use here. And they're all about the same hardness. But I wanted to use the really long one for these longer strands because I knew that the lines would be straighter. If I tried to do this with a shorter pastel and my hand wasn't totally steady, I knew that the lines would probably waver back and forth. So now I'm going in with one of the shorter ones, and I'm using this to add the highlights because I didn't want to highlight the whole entire strands. I wanted to just highlight a few spots on the strands. So I'm using this, and the paper is really good for this because it's not, because it's velour, kind of the angle that I'm pressing at is really determining where the brighter white is versus the lighter white. So it worked out really well. I'm glad I chose this paper. Now just doing some finishing touches. If you look at the web, there are some areas where there's like some little fuzzies or some thicker or brighter strands. So I'm just kind of bringing those in. And then I had noticed right there, I don't know if I touched the spider or what I did, but there was a little bit of like a smudge right there. So I was trying to go back in and fix that little smudge. And now I'm using my shortest white to add even more highlights and get into some of those smaller areas. This was pretty hard to get the line in the exact place as the line I put down first. So you can see there are a couple areas where the lines are kind of doubled up. And I was trying to avoid that, but it's not the easiest to mark over a tiny little line. So I'm just about finished here. I think I do a little bit more just softening up the background. But the finished painting should appear here in a second. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this was helpful. I am still learning, so if you have any suggestions or tips for me or for my viewers, that would be awesome. I'm sure we would appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the final painting. Thanks for watching.